Hello, all. Happy Friday. This is Sam and Ken again. Today's topic is recordings. We're gonna go under the covers, and I learned a lot from going through this preparing for this webinar, and I think you guys will as well. Okay, so the way I want to start is just a level set. Let's do a brief review because it's always good to start with things that most of us are familiar with. So let's go to Blue Iris. All right, so what is the prize of all this? Like what's the goal we're trying to fulfill? So like with recordings and like it's all kind of tied together. So we have recordings, which we're going to deep dive into today. We have triggers, which which is what determines like when to record or not to record. And we also have clips and archiving for like once you start recording all this stuff, where do you put it? And so what's the end game? So the end game is you want to be able to go back to your recordings, and if something you need to review or something bad happened, like for example, like a porch pirate stole your Amazon delivery or something bad happened on your business campus, how do you identify that clip quickly? And so that's why you record, and that's why you use the functionality of Blue Iris. Like businesses, for example, like this, I know with a lot of businesses, they're concerned about this thing called slip and fall or whatever, where people fake falling and try to sue the business, blah, blah, blah. So how do you identify those events without going through hours and hours of recordings, right? So that's where I want to start. So one big concept to keep in mind is the clip list. You have this thing called clips and you have this thing called alerts. They're really triggers, like based off of motion settings. I'll get into details in a second, but based off of the motion settings, when to note stuff in the database so that you can draw attention to it quickly. And why it's very subtle is because the interface is exactly the same. Like this is a trigger / alert, and this is a clip, but they're completely different things. And what I mean by that is this is actually the file like on your that's stored in your Windows Explorer, in Windows Explorer / your Windows machine. So one thing to keep in mind is like with the clips, there's some cool tools here to like identify what's going on behind the scenes. So like when you do an open containing folder, when you're in the clips, you'll find the exact file. Like Blue Iris will point you to the exact file associated with that icon. So this file, ADSL and blah, 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 is associated with, which one did I click on? This one, the one that I just right clicked on, that's highlighted, kind of highlighted. Okay. And if you double click on it, okay, what do you notice first? You notice like it's like this is what we refer to as a playback window. Like you notice how it switched from the live view of all the cameras to a similar but different, view, right? And the X on the top right kind of identifies it. The details on the top of the window kind of identify it. But I mean, it's fairly easy, but it can be confusing if you have single view for your cameras. But this is the playback window. And so what Blue Iris is doing is because you're on clips, i.e. you're looking at the files, what's going on is you're playing, like I had this thing recording for 7 hours. And so when you're playing this, you're playing all the recordings based off of this information. So on March 29th, I was recording on this camera, ADF7, which is the gate. And when you go to this and double click, you're just playing all the stuff from ADF7, okay? So why is this important? Like maybe, like something happened on the 29th at the front gate and you're trying to figure out what that thing is. Then you can be as specific as going to the clip and going to that camera and then just playing it from there. So that's one option. Don't have to do it that way. That's just one way to do it. And Blue Iris provides all these great filters too. So like maybe like, you can try to scroll down through all these files, which is, kind of laborious, right? Or you can just filter, like, something happened on the 29th, right? So just go back to the 29th. This is March 29th. Like I could just click on this, right? So if you know the date, just filter and go to it. Like Blue Iris provides a capability. So that's what's good about clips. And so that's one way to record that's definitely recording it. And the other aspect, which I like even more, which is where I lean towards, is the triggers, because the triggers is based off of your motion sensors. Like, the trigger, basically the trigger tab in camera settings, trigger tab. And keep in mind, like, there's different ways of triggering the camera. There's motion, there's, if you have a camera with AI on it, the camera can trigger the, Blue Iris to record. You might have like those motion sensor things also placed somewhere like in your house or outside, and that can trigger the camera. So like there's lots of things that can trigger the camera, but for most people, motion sensors is the most common. And so that's why I dive deep in, but there's other ways you can trigger the camera. Trigger means like identify something important as well as start recording. Okay. So that being said, here's all your triggers based off of what your settings was, right? And so, well, why I like this view better, well, not better, but it's just different. Everyone's got their own preferences. Is I like the playback capability in the timeline view. So what I mean by that is I can double click on the timeline, and now I'm back in playback, but I have all the cameras visible. And why that's cool to me is because I can just pop into different events and see what's going on. Like this camera, I'm gonna clear the date. I don't need that. So let's go back to the current time. So like I can go chronologically through the events and see which camera is associated with it. And if things happen in parallel, it'll show that. And so I like this view. Like here's something that happened in parallel. Like there's two alerts associated with the same timestamp. So that's why I use this. So this is like when you're trying to search, like you know something happened, but you don't know exactly which camera it happened at. And again, like if you want to like focus on one camera, like if I wanted to just focus in on the entry gate, I can just select it. I can do one camera here, and then same thing. I can just see all the stuff that happened in the entry gate for like last night. And again, you can search by date. Like if you're looking for like last night, that's fine too. It's all there. So that's the goal. Like, how do you search and find stuff that you think is important quickly and efficiently? Like whether it be for law enforcement or whether it just be for, for your own curiosity. Okay. So it's always good to refresh like all the capabilities of Blue Iris, because I think the search is like one of the biggest value adds, and knowing how to use this stuff, I think is very important to getting the real benefit of Blue Iris. Okay, so this is live view, and I can play. It's inactive during the day usually, but I can turn on my camera if I wanted to. So if you guys like that, well, it just doesn't matter. All right, so that's the prize. Like we're trying to get good recordings and meaningful stuff so that you guys can search using Blue Iris tools, and then weigh the options. Like if you want to make sure you don't, like if you have storage costs and you don't want to store too much, like all those types of risks and benefits I'm going to go through, and it'll help you decide like what's right for you in terms of all the different options in Blue Iris. So that's a UI, and then keep in mind it's one-to-one. Like the timeline's a different view, but it's basically the same stuff. So like whether it's on the clip list on the left or whether it's on the timeline view, the data that you're seeing is one-to-one. So like if there's a trigger on the clip list, you'll see that same correlation on the timeline. So now I'm going to tie things together. I'm going to tie the settings, how all this stuff, this is like the key part of the presentation. How do you tie all these settings into the user interface? So I'm gonna build the timeline view, right? So here's, I just picked, two random events. These were canceled, because of AI. There are 8 cameras, ADF3, one started at 107 and the other one started at 105. So 107, here's on the timeline, here's 105, here's 106, here's 105. So these are the corresponding events on timeline. These are the events on the clip list. So that's the one-to-one mapping I was talking about. All right, so here's trigger 1, here's trigger 2. So what's happening? So, behind the scenes in terms of software, like you got these cameras and you connect your cameras to Blue Iris. So now you got all these feeds coming in to Blue Iris. Like think of it as a pipe. And then we decide based off of your settings how to save it into Windows. So, when to create these files and how big these files should be. Okay, so that's the basic idea. That seems pretty intuitive. Like cameras come in, you record and you dump it into Windows in file. I mean, computers, you can only store in terms of files and folders, right? Okay, so now the question is, how do you identify these things of importance? Well, those are your trigger settings. So like the reason why there's an item in the clip list, like ADF3, 526, 107, the reason why this was called out as something important is because of your trigger settings. And so what that means is, we did a webinar on triggers and alerts. Like if you don't know the settings or you're not familiar with it, you have to review that webinar. But assuming that you have a fairly good understanding of the settings, let me just review it a little bit. I'm talking about the trigger tab, the motion settings. Like I'm not gonna go through all the stuff, but I highlight the big stuff in this presentation. So for this trigger, like you have a make time. So you specify when you think the camera should start recording, and you start with motion, then you start with motions and contrast. Like did something move in the scene, and then the make time determines that it moved long enough that it's of importance to you. And then if those thresholds are met, which is basically camera settings, trigger, sense, motion, and then trigger, like that whole paradigm is what I'm talking about. So this is sense, and then make time, like was the motion persistent for at least 1 second, whatever that make time setting is, then you trigger, okay? So those are the settings, and so that's how Blue Iris determines when to start identifying things of importance and puts in the database. Okay. Now we always recommend putting at least a pre-trigger buffer. So like, oftentimes we say 5 seconds. It could be longer, depending what you want. But I have it at 5. So based off of that, if the make time is 1 second, it's additive. So like the stuff that the pre-trigger buffer includes a make time plus whatever you specify for the buffer. So if you said the buffer is 5 seconds and the make time is 1 second, that means the other stuff that's stored is going to be another 4 seconds worth of stuff before it actually the camera actually triggered. Okay. Just in terms of other notations that are referred to in the software, like for some of the alerts, we refer to the motion leading edge. So that's when motion was detected, like the minimum object size and the contrast was met, like some kind of motion happened on your camera. The trigger leading edge is when that motion was significant enough, there was enough of a consistent motion associated with whatever first triggered, that it told Blue Iris to record. That image is called the trigger leading image. Okay, and so this is actually the trigger leading image that you see in the data in your interface. And when you do a high res, when you do like on the database for triggers, if you choose Some of you guys choose high res image. That image is the trigger leading image. All right, so let me pause there for a second. So right here, you should have an understanding of how the trigger settings tells Blue Iris to start identifying things of importance. And that's why it's on the clip list and the timeline. And then based off of recordings, which I'll get to in a second, is what's being recorded when you do playback. So let me pause there, make sure that there's no questions associated with that part of it. I don't see any raised hands or questions. Ken, do you see anything?
Nothing yet. A bunch of Q&A just came in, but I have to take a look at that yet.
Okay. Okay. All right, I'm gonna keep moving. There's some Q&A stuff, but it's not really relevant to what I'm talking about right now. Okay. So that's how it records. That's how it identifies things of importance and puts it on the clip list. Okay. All right. So now that you understand that, like basically you got this pipe coming in, you have these settings that tells Blue Iris to identify things of importance, and all these things of importance, trigger 1, trigger 2, it's placed on the database. All right. So once you know that, it becomes much easier to understand and digest the recordings tab. So you got this pipe and you're identifying things of importance and putting in the database, trigger 1, trigger 2, blah, blah, blah. So what's the difference between when triggered and when alerted? Well, some of these triggers, so you always record the triggers. You always identify the triggers. However, you may not always send an alert associated with the trigger. And the most common use case is obviously with AI, right? These settings that I kind of called out, like these were canceled. And so this didn't send an alert because AI said that nothing was found, right? That's like the most common thing. But there's a whole bunch of other settings that you can choose in the alerts tab that like all this stuff. And then we'll dive into this in another webinar, but there's other logic that you can have that decides when a trigger actually sends an alert. All right. So even though we're identifying things of interest, you may not send an alert always. So now it becomes obvious. So like if you have the settings to when triggered, well, that means trigger 1 and trigger 2 will both be dumped into the recording. If you've just when alerted, that means only trigger 2 will be dumped into the recording file. And so it, like there's some risk associated with that, right? Because once you decide not to record, it's gone forever. Like it's not like you can go back in time, right? Unless of course you have continuous, and we'll talk about that in a second. But so if you have when triggered versus when alerted, there's a little bit of risk associated with the fact that maybe this was canceled by AI for it was a missed alert, like it canceled it, but actually there was a person there, for example. And if you choose not to record it, then it's gone forever, right? So just something to keep in mind. And then with continuous, like all you're doing is the entire pipe, like you're dumping it into the file. You're storing everything. And the triggers themselves, like that's always going to be written to the database anyways. So you'll still have the triggers, but in terms of the content in the files, you're storing everything. Like all the dead space that doesn't have triggers is also being stored. And this is oftentimes the option for businesses because they have liability, they can be sued, all that kind of stuff, and so they have a much lower risk tolerance, and so they'll typically record everything so that they're protected. Okay, so with continuous, now you get the idea. Everything's being dumped to the file. What's the difference between plus alerts plus triggered? Well, if you have multiple streams coming in, the main and the sub, like dual streams, you can get some incremental savings associated with when you're saving to the file. With continuous, you're saving both streams. You're saving everything. Nothing is lost. With continuous plus alerts, when there's an alert, this will be on the main stream. Everything else will be on the substream. And with triggered, continuous plus triggered, all that means is the mainstream for the triggers and the substreams for everything else. And there's pretty good savings from continuous to the continuous plus, but between the two, some incremental savings maybe with alerts, just because you're only saving the main for when the triggers were alerted. Like this one will just be the substream, the low resolution. So there's some additional savings with continuous plus alerts. But and overall, the big savings is continuous versus continuous plus, and then the bigger savings is when choices versus the continuous choices. Okay, so that's like most of what you guys use. Like either you'll choose when triggered, when alerted, or you'll use continuous. But just for completeness, periodic is there. So the only difference with periodic is the fact that it's not based off of motion sensors. It's just based off of time. So periodic means, like in my settings, I have 60 minutes, which is every hour, record for the first 10 minutes. 600 seconds is the same as 10 minutes, okay? So every hour, record for 10 minutes. Every hour, record for 10 minutes. So that's what periodic is about. So it's not based off of motion, it's based off of time. And then finally, triggered plus periodic. Well, that's just about, sometimes you want both. Like this is the best of both worlds, I guess, in some sense. If you like periodic, you might want to get the triggered events recorded as well. And so that's how you do that. All right, so now I hope it's much easier to digest like all these different choices and what they mean. And you have this table now, and it should be much easier to figure out like what's right for you guys. All right, so now I'm gonna go to the bottom half of the dialogue. So these are the choices for video recording. And then the bottom half is the options. Like some of these are obvious, like pre-trigger buffer. I'm not gonna go talk about this stuff, but like the point of confusion, at least for me, was this cut video and the combine. Like this is what determines how you create the files. Okay. Another kind of important concept. So like now that you know like what's being dumped into the bucket, this is about how do you create that bucket and what are the options there. So the default from is combine or cut video with the time as well as the size. And that's fairly obvious. So like if you're doing whether you're doing new the win settings or the continuous settings, you're dumping this into a bucket and you're telling this file to close after 8 hours or the size of the file. So if you need 2 gigs, these are all your choices, right? I think the default is 4 gigs, which is more than fine. So that's how it normally runs. And that's what's going on in terms of creating the file. Okay, so if you have it unchecked, that means cut after each trigger. So if you uncheck it, it's kind of cool. Like that means like you're gonna create a unique file for each trigger. So like, this is in the context of if you're doing when triggered, all right? So like if you're doing when triggered and you do a cut, after every trigger, boom, you're gonna cut the file, boom, right here. So instead of like a 2 gig file, like a big file, you'll have like small files. And so I'll show you that. Pictures worth 1,000 words. I was playing around with this. So look at the differences. You can tell by the file size. Like this is when I was not using cut. When I had it, I mean, I had combine on, like combine all the alerts into one file. And then if I have unchecked, don't combine, you get these little snippets of each of the alerts, which is kind of cool. It's really cool, especially when you're debugging. And I'll talk about that, not this webinar, but for some other tips and tricks. But like I was playing with this, and so each alert is just one file. So there's some advantages here as well. So that's what it's. So now you know what it's doing behind the scenes. So like if it's unchecked, cut. Anytime there's a trigger, cut. So you're making these smaller files associated with each trigger. So then the final option is cut video when triggered with break time. What's this bottom one about? So if it's checked, it's the default. All right, the default is unchecked. So let's start with that. If it's unchecked, you're basically doing one of these two, right? It's off. So like we've already talked about that. If it's checked, only thing you're doing is like, say you got a lot of triggers. Like, I don't know, like you're a business and you have a front door and like from 6 to 8, for example, all your employees are coming in. So it's like rush hour, like the door's busy. So do you want a trigger for each individual person walking in? Maybe, maybe not. And so by using cut combine and then specifying the time, you're specifying how long that gap can be. So if this gap between guy one walking in and lady one walking in is less than 10 seconds, don't bother cutting here, like cut it here. So like, and this logic will continue on and on. So like if the next set comes in, and it's all less than 10 seconds, like I'll like those that rush of like 10 people that just came in, it'll all be under one file versus individual files. And so that's kind of like a user preference as well. So it's kind of cool. So like you can limit the number of cuts. And then like during the normal business hours, like 9 to 5, like it's just regular customers coming in. And then it'll just go back to like cutting when each guy comes in. So it's a user preference that you can that you have available as well. Okay, so where are we? So we talked about the top half, like all these different recording settings, like what you consider important and what do you want to save. And then once you decided that, how do you want to make these files? Do you want small files like for each trigger? Do you want to combine them and have fewer files? That's what these bottom options are about. And so that's kind of like where we're at. Let's do a question. Hey, Ken, any questions that I should address based off like where we are in the conversation?
Bruce Adelsman is asking about break time. If you can just define that and show what break time means in the context of everything you're talking about.
Oh,
thanks.
Absolutely. So let's just go back to Blue Iris. I just keep the defaults usually. So camera settings, trigger. Here's your break time. So the default is 10 seconds. All that means is like here's a 12, like here's a normal, a fairly normal clip. Like if the camera triggered for that car leaving and the gauge kind of making some noise, but now it's quiet. So Blue Iris is told like once the noise stops, once the motion stops, keep going for like 10 seconds. Okay, so that's a break time, and so that's it. So like what's cool about Blue Iris is if it's longer than 10 seconds. So like take a look at the other clip. Like why is this one 12 and why is this one 42? The setting's the same. It's still the same camera, right? 10 seconds, but after the 10 seconds, more noise came. So here's a car. Tesla's going slowly. It's still working. It's still, still taking some time, right? So that's why this one's 42 seconds. Like cut at 10 seconds, but if there's still motion, and Blue Iris is really good about that, keep recording. And so it's all done behind the scenes. So like it's fantastic. Like you just got to set the break time. I think 10 seconds is like the default as well as what most people like. Like especially when there's like a false trigger. Like here's one. Like, well, this is 26 seconds long, but like here's one 10 seconds. Like nothing really happened, but there's some sensitivity that made the camera trigger. So 10 seconds is a good medium to like if it's a false trigger versus a real trigger, to like determine what's going on in the scene. So I think that's why 10 seconds. I think it's like it's also like a security standard too, like beyond just Blue Iris. A lot of monitoring stations also use 10 seconds as the default. Okay, moving on. All right, so that's where we're at. So now you know how to tell Blue Iris to pay attention to stuff, and then based off of what you pay attention to, like how do you want the files to be created? All right, so why might you care? So let me go. All right, here's a decision tree. Let's go through like, what's your thought process? You can do different things for different cameras. That's fine too. These are camera specific. So this is kind of the way it's played out, like from customer feedback, I guess, and my own. I mean, this is like a lot of it's my own opinion. So like, you can do what's right for you. So like most homeowners choose 1+ settings, less load on the file system, environment is quiet, don't want to bother recording all those uneventful moments. Like, like for most homes, right? Like it's fairly quiet. Like once the homeowners leave, once the kids leave, during the day, like not much is going on, right? And so why bother recording all that stuff that, like the leaves blowing or like, like there's no reason why you need to record it. So most people don't. However, like I talked about the liability issue, like, when when there's litigation and lawyers involved, the cost of storing versus the cost of being sued, that changes considerably, right? And so that's why businesses tend to use continuous. And the biggest thing here between win versus continuous, like, is the risk of missing something versus storage costs. And so that's usually what decides what you choose. So that's your first choice. Like here's your first choice. Do I want the win settings or the continuous settings? Okay. Okay, then after that, if you go with the win settings, if you go left, when triggered versus when alerted, I think the most relevant case for when alerted, like there's more risk, right? Like like you may not be recording a trigger because it wasn't alerted on. However, like I know like a lot of you guys live in Florida, and like for some reason at night with all the bugs and spiders, like it keeps triggering a lot of, and you get a lot of noise. And so for a lot of you guys, like you use AI to like filter out those alerts. And so so that's one use case where if the number of triggers is just a lot of noise and the AI is filtering it out, then you probably want to go to when alerted. Otherwise, like, I'm in California, there aren't that many bugs, like, fairly dry climate. The correlation between triggered and noise and, like the AI is pretty good. Like oftentimes when it triggers, it's actually a meaningful trigger that releases an alert. Not always. Like you can look at this cam, like, here's a gate, right? This is like, well, this was still valid because he was leaving, but like, I do get noise, right? Like here's like this one was canceled. Like there's nothing here. Oh, that's a car, so that was valid. uh let's see, like here, like last night, 12 seconds. Oh, that's a light too, so that's valid. So anyway, I guess my point is like I will get some cancellations, like nothing found, false alert. Like this is a blinking. It was confusing. It confused the AI. But anyways, like for me, the motion triggers and leading to an AI discovery is almost is fairly accurate. There isn't that much noise. I don't get triggered on bugs. I don't get triggered on uh spiders, that kind of stuff. Like as you can see from my alerts from the motion triggers. So I keep them. So for my situation, I would definitely keep one triggered because I'd rather have recorded than miss something. Okay, so now that's when triggered. Now let's go to continuous, the right side. So continuous, this is really about like once you choose continuous, it's all about like how much storage you want to keep. So if you have storage costs concerns, alerts is more more savings, I guess, incrementally more than triggered, but I would say they're mostly the same in terms of storage savings. There's a big savings with the pluses versus continuous. And the only other caveat is, remember when you got continuous, you're always recording. So whether it's alert or trigger, like with the wins, if you're doing trigger versus alerted, you may not be recording something, right? That's never the case with continuous, because continuous means you're recording everything. The only difference is, like, say you went to the database and found this, and then you want to like find other stuff before it. Well, that means all you got to do is you got to go to that file and then start playing. Then you can go backward to forwards because everything is recorded. So all I'm saying here is like this alert. This is ADS7 5:27 3 a.m. I can go to the file. I can go back. I can do search on ADS7, and then I can go back to 3 whatever that time was, 3:27, I guess. Was it 3:27? What time was that? 87 3:11. So I can go back to the file. Like now, right? Like this is not a good example because I'm cutting when triggered. But let me go to a better example. So like let me go back when I wasn't playing with the triggered stuff. This is like all recording. So all right, here's 6 hours, right? ADF5 47. 6 hours of recordings. So if I want to go to that alert, like, what was that? ADF7? ADF5, sorry. Let me go to ADF5. ADF, where is it? Here we go. So if I want this alert at 4:07, if I want to see like what's before it, I can easily go back to the file. So 4:07, the 4:07 file, here it is. What time was that? 4:07, 2:30 in the afternoon. This started at 8 for 6 hours. So I think this is the file. So I can just play back from the file to find stuff before or after an event. These are all the events. So all I'm saying here, the big takeaway here is like, once you have continuous, everything's being recorded. You're not losing anything. So whether you have alerts or triggered, you have storage savings, but in terms of going back and finding out stuff before or after an event, you can still do that, no problem. Okay, so the decision tree. So when you go and set up a new camera and you're like, how do you figure out which one to choose? You want to decide between when versus continuous, and then based off of that, you have to choose between when triggered, when alerted versus the 3 continuous choices. Fairly simple. Okay, so that's a decision tree for the top half. Any questions, Ken, that we need to call out?
Oh, no, it's quiet right now.
Okay, cool. Okay, so for the file options, here's a scenario. So like this is the default, and if you're creating a lot of triggers, best to combine to reduce files and load on the file system. So this is the default. I think most people are just happy with this, especially if you're a homeowner, and so you can just leave it. Why would you uncheck it? Want a separate BVR for each trigger. So I choose this option because my cameras are pretty quiet at home. My cameras are primarily used for security surveillance. My house normally has little activity, so I like separate files for each trigger. And like I work with Ken a lot, right? Obviously, so like if I want to share an issue that I find, and Ken wants the BVR file, I can easily do that. So that's kind of like why I do that. All right, why would I uncheck this and check cut combine? So this has benefits for the Win Plus and the Continuous Plus. So like if you're using Win Plus settings up top, combine triggers alerts into one file when you are getting many together. For example, when employees enter front door. So like you like individual files for each of your triggers, but this is like that rush hour scenario, like for a business during 6 and 9, I guess, when employees are walking in, like combine all that into like one file instead of like chopping it up into all these small petite files. And then this one, like the last one of, Continuous Plus. So the advantage for Continuous Plus and having combine cut is, cut video when triggered. So this one is about, a lot of people, like when they play on a clip, like if you don't use the, let me clear all this stuff, clear this, clear that. I search based off of events because, it's just my preference. If you're one of those guys that likes to look at files and playback files, um, that's fine too. And one kind of cool thing with um, the cut video is uh, anytime you start playing something, it won't start with dead space. It'll start with an event. So so that's kind of cool. Like, like if you want to like always start with an event in the beginning, user preference thing, you could use that setting. And finally, when you use both, most people don't, because it's kind of confusing, right? You're saying like combine. The first one's saying combine, but the second one's saying cut. So the cut's going to drive it. So like whenever you have a trigger, it's going to cut. Okay, so it's kind of going to behave like this. However, like there's a like say you got cameras like in a business and Monday through Friday is busy, but then like Saturday, Sunday, it's quiet, right? Like nobody's there. Cameras never trigger. So in that case, there's no trigger, so it's just going to keep running, and then it's going to hit these limits. So like after 8 hours, it'll cut it, or 2 gigabytes. It's an edge case, like it's it's available. You can use it, and this is like one scenario where you would use it. Okay, and then just for completeness of periodic use cases, so just to revisit, this is all time-based. Why do people do this? Where is it? Oops, where'd I go? Oh, first hour, yeah. Like record for the first 10 minutes on every hour. What I've seen so far is like environmental groups tend to use this a lot. Like when they're counting, like the use case that resonates with me is like there's this wildlife organization in the north that counts a salmon population, and so how they do that is they have these underwater cameras, and so every hour, at the top of every hour for 10 minutes, they record, and then somehow they can count and determine how many salmon are present. So that's one use case for it. And then the other use case that I guess the primary reason why this came about was some people, like some users, like a time lapse. Like I only go back to my recordings like when there's like some issue, like I don't know, like some like a porch pipe would steal my Amazon stuff. But some of you guys like to go back and review like your cameras like quickly. And so this is kind of a cool way to do that. Like it's kind of like a time lapse, but it's kind of like just like an abbreviation of the day, because you're only storing 10 minutes of the day every hour. And so that's another use case for using trigger plus periodic. Okay. So I hope that gives you a better understanding of like what all the stuff does in recordings. And once you know this, especially this diagram, like how this ties to this, like now you should be able to do more stuff in terms of like figuring out like your requirements and what all the stuff Blue Arts can do to like fulfill those requirements for you guys. Okay, that's everything for this Friday. Let's open up for Q&A.
Remind everybody where they can find this recording after.
Oh yes. So I'll have a little comment here. Well, it's also actually it's already here. So like you can go to the YouTube channel, and we place it all in youtube.com/c/Blue Air Support/videos. That's where all of them are. We have playlists. So if you're new, start with onboarding, just get a feel for all of the software. Tips and tricks is like the more, like the more obscure stuff, like if Windows and Blue Iris is not working well kind of stuff. And the videos tab just gives you a dump of all of the recordings. And if you're new and you didn't grasp all the stuff I was talking about today, we also have we have a recording and storage webinar which is like an overall view of the user interface and recordings and storage. That's a good refresher as well. And so in addition to this recording, which will be placed in early next week, you also have access to that previous recording. Okay, let's do open panel. Let's see, any raised hands? No raised hands. Any questions that you want to address, Ken?
Not at the moment. Why don't you go with the raised hands if there are any?
A lot of folks on the call, but no, everyone's shy today. Or maybe everyone's getting ready for their weekend travels. Ian Brown, a lot of talk. Oops, wrong person. Oh wait, everyone keeps bouncing around. Peter Huber, a lot of talk. I see you're unmuted, Peter, but I don't think your mic is working. Okay, I guess no questions. I don't know, Ken, like, should we call it early or did you want to address anything?
Several Q&As piled up just now, but I'm not sure if these are relevant to the discussion. I haven't really read through them yet here. If somebody puts something in the Q&A, go ahead and raise your hand and you can ask it live.
Oh, all right. We just got 3 raised hands. All right. Eric, Elmer allowed to talk. Austin, whoever chimes in first, go ahead. And then Joseph allowed to talk. Wow,
Hey.
there's a lot of questions. Okay, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. This is probably going to be a noob question, but can you remind me how to disable alerts, I guess, but still, I guess, still record on motion? So the scenario is this is a home surveillance situation and I'm out mowing the lawn. I'm going to be triggering it when I go back and forth, a million times. What's the best way to stop my phone from blowing up with push notifications or emails when that's going on? But still, I don't want to stop recording. That's the problem I've run into before. I disabled recording inadvertently.
Oh, okay. I would, so the shield will stop it recording. I would
use 2 separate profiles. You have, one for normal operation, or and then a second profile for, basically paused alerts. And then you go into each of your cameras, and then you can define for which profiles each alert is active for. It's very granular that way.
Okay, so the key is the profiles. Thanks.
It could be, but do you want to do you always want to record, period? Like you just don't want to be alerted?
Right.
So I think this is even easier.
It's designed to stop everything, really. So you don't want that. You want to use profiles. You can also make it easy, if it's easier to think about it, by using a different schedule, and that schedule calls different profiles. So you have one that's basically, home, armed, home, disarmed, basically. A couple different scenarios.
Got it.
You don't think using the shield and just disabling this is good? Like for this?
Yeah, that will also work, but then that's taking away the default function of the shield, which is basically to disarm everything. If you're okay with that, that's fine. I mean, you can do it this way, but then you don't have a way to disarm it again anymore. So there's stopping recording.
So that's a trade-off. So like if if you always want to record, like you said, like I would just do this, disable that, and then I would just turn off the, just use the shield, turn it off, like while you're mowing the lawn.
I see.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what I did.
And you have no way to turn off recording, is what it is. So it's,
right.
yeah, a bit of a trade-off.
So you understand the trade-off there, right?
I do.
And if it's a concern, then you just create another profile, like just what Ken was saying. Like you can have like an off recording profile, like make one up, and then you just go to your cameras, and then you go to record tab. Unfortunately, I mean you have to do it for all the cameras, but like, or maybe just the backyard or like the outdoor cameras. But anyway, so you would go to that profile, like say open close was
he wants to record continuously, so it would be actually on the alerts tab, and then you go to each alert.
Oh, sorry, yeah, the alerts tab. Sorry. So to turn off the alerts, you just go to the alerts tab, and then for that profile, unsync it, and then just turn this off here, right?
Yeah, that will also work. Yeah. But you can also go into the on alert button here, and then you can define for which profiles each alert occurs.
Oh yeah, that's true too. Like,
oh yeah.
So like you see, I have like a whole bunch of alerts, right? So like these two are active for all the profiles. So the night one, like a 3, that's nighttime for me. So like you could have like your stop recording profile, and then like say that's 3, then you would not have 3 selected. Like you would have everything else selected. So when profile 3 is hit, or if you switch it to profile 3, no alerts will be sent. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like if you had, all right, let me, I'll do one of them. Like say 3 was your no alerts, no recording, no alerts profile, right? So for this alert, you would go boom, 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 and then. So anytime you're in profile 3, no alerts will be sent. You see that? So those are your 2 options. You can like mess with the shield settings if you wanted to, or you can just do it individually, like create a new profile for like you're not recording profile. Okay.
And what you said as well, Sam, on the alert page, just disable motion alerts as well during profile 3. That would work just as well.
Yeah, you can just do that.
So there's 3 different ways to get to the same.
So choose which ones works for you. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. I hope that helps.
It does.
Okay, good.
Oh, hi. A lot of new cameras are coming with AI on the camera itself. Is there any advantage? I mean, I'm about to buy a few new additional cameras. Is there any advantage to getting those cameras that have AI on the camera? And can you set up Blue Iris so that when the camera detects an AI event, that AI event is somehow sensed by Blue Iris and used in addition to Blue Iris' own triggers?
Yeah, 100%. Ken, you want to walk through that, or want me to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is supported. The camera would have to be configured using OnVIF, and the events come over as OnVIF events. Really, as far as advantages, disadvantages of that, obviously the camera's more expensive, but then the AI is free in Blue Iris if you use DeepStack. The other thing, it has to maintain a separate connection to the camera just to pull those OnVIF events. And sometimes that could break, I guess, that additional connection. Yeah, you have options for sure. I mean, yeah, you can use OnVIF triggering. I think that's where Sam was going to show right now.
So So in other words, I should probably just go with the cheaper version of the same camera that doesn't have AI and then just use DeepStack and Blue Iris.
Well, yes, you can certainly experiment with DeepStack. It's new to us as well, so you know, we're finding some interesting effects from that. You know, mislabeling of objects and so on. But you know, I don't know. You know, your AI built into the camera may or may not be more advanced. You know, you really do have to do some research on that. But if you're going to use the on-VIF triggering, where Sam is showing right now, you need to check that box that says camera's digital input or motion alarm, and then back on the video network page, and then network configure, yeah, right there. Then you have to do the get on-VIF trigger events from the camera. And it must have first also been set up using the find inspect so that it finds the correct on-VIF source values to use.
Okay.
So those things, and then as well, obviously the on-VIF port number needs to be correct. So there's several things to configure to get that to work, but it is possible.
The one other question I had, you know, obviously you have hundreds of options inside the configuration for each camera. And I have, I'm going to end up having a total of 28 cameras in my system. I find, is there a way for me to modify all 28 cameras on one specific parameter rather than have to go into each camera and change that one parameter if I decide to change it on all of them?
Well, I've gone down that road with the sync camera options you'll find in the trigger and record and alerts tabs. What that does is basically you pick one camera to be the leader, and then you make changes there, and then it's automatically distributed to the other cameras for those specific pages. What you're describing is more of an overall kind of a global settings editor, and that is something that I'm still looking at as something that we may add. But
Yeah, it would be great if there was a way to, okay, at least, you know, okay, I want to do this change to all of my cameras on this side of the building. So I select all of them and then say edit. And what I'm presented with is sort of like a blank version of all these, and whatever setting I go into that and I change, that one setting is applied to all of them. Right. And so I, you know, in that sort of temporary mode, I'm only seeing whatever change I did, instead of being presented with all the various options that each camera has. They're all sort of in blank mode, and whatever I change, that gets applied to all of the cameras I get.
yeah, I certainly understand how something like that would be, the UI would work for that, but it's not there today, but we get you partly there with the sync options.
Yeah.
You understand
Okay,
this part,
thank you.
right? You understand this, like, you know, like choose your, like this, the thing on the right, whichever camera you choose, that's your base camera. And then when you sync, so like by doing the sync, like you're telling this camera to like pull from that. So if this is your master camera, you can go at least that far today. And you can do the same for the record settings and the alert settings.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Sam, I'm back.
Okay. Oh, hey, Peter.
Can you-
Yeah, yeah.
Hi. Sam, can you just go through the section when you've got a camera where to actually record it to? Because I've got a camera overseas, and when I click on it, it says, sorry, the file could not be found. So Ken suggested I'm recording to disk. But if you'd be kind enough just to go through that those motions again, I'd appreciate it.
How to find the corresponding file on disk?
No, how to, if I have a camera set it up and I want to record, say, a video that it's recording, where do I go to record it to? Which, you know, what are the steps? Yeah, sorry.
So when you do in the record tab, I mean, I just use a default. So like, I just choose new.
Yeah.
So this is what's telling you like which folder to store it to. Okay, so
Okay.
it's this concept called new. Like it's not like there's like a folder called new in Windows, right? So what is Blue Iris? What does new mean to Blue Iris, right? That's the question. So like this camera is recording, it's going to dump to this thing, this folder called new. So what is new? So then you go to clips and archiving, and this is where you tell Blue. I told Blue Iris that new is G Blue Iris new.
Okay. Yep.
So that's the mapping. And so if I go to, this is what, ADF7, I think.
Clips and archiving. Let me just go back to that one. Where did you find that clips and archiving again?
Global settings, clips and archiving.
In the original, in the what's name? Yeah, just have a look there. Clips and archiving. Okay. New. It goes on my C drive. Blue Iris new. Gotcha. And there, for some reason, that's where I've stored it. That's rather strange.
And it's easy to
Okay.
find too. Like, you just go to
Yeah.
clips, just right click, open continue folder. Blue Iris will find it for you. Like you don't have to do anything.
Yeah. But when I click on it,
There it is.
Yep. And when I click on it, it says, it says, sorry, the file could not be found, which is rather strange. But anyway, now that I know the path to go to, I'll try and find a way to do that.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks, Peter.
My pleasure. Oh, Ken, if you're listening, did you get my email?
Be checking that for you.
Thanks.
Yes, I did. Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. So if you can get back to me on that, I'd appreciate it. I'd be happy to, as I mentioned on the email. Okay. Either you or Sam.
Will do. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Peter.
Pleasure. Thanks, Sam.
Okay, is that any other open questions? I think everyone's unmuted. If you have a question, just
Here's
chime
one
in.
that I'll just read. He says his microphone's not working, so I'll read the question. What is the best way to record every camera all the time at a slow frame rate, for example, 1 frame per second, until a trigger occurs? On a trigger camera or IO event, run the camera at full frame rate for X seconds, or X might be 30. Well, the 30 or 45, that would be the break time. So you would just increase that. So really what we have to perform this functionality is the new continuous plus trigger, continuous plus alert methods. That will record the subframe or the substream continuously and then add the mainstream when triggered. So that's our best answer for this question now. There is periodic plus triggered, but it's a very specialized mode, and I don't really recommend that for most people to open.
Thanks, Ken. Bentley allowed to talk. Oh, there's more people. How come it's not sorting by?
Yeah. I guess I'll modify my question. Can give me an answer, but I was just wondering, what would you describe as the best way to handle, like what I would say, incidental scheduling, like a holiday in the middle of a week? You want, say, the holiday to be treated just like you do maybe nighttime or weekends. And then automatically goes back, if possible, to the weekday schedule. What's the best way to handle that?
Do we have holidays in here? I don't think we can do that.
There's really no, we don't have a way to schedule schedules. The schedule is used to schedule profiles. So it controls which profile is active. But as far as changing the schedule itself, that is really done manually. I mean, you have to say you're going on vacation or you're back from vacation, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no way. We don't map it to calendar dates and holidays. Not yet.
The one thing that has come up, we have a camera schedule, event schedule right now, where you can put things on a schedule by day and time for the camera. Something like that, maybe opening it up so it's more of a general thing for the entire software, and maybe you can do it for specific days. So something like that has come up. So we'll look into that. Thanks for your suggestions.
Okay.
I have another question.
Okay.
On the iOS app, I want to be able to connect to Blue Iris, but only when I'm connecting through a VPN. Is that supported so that I don't need to have any ports open or anything like that on my firewall?
Yeah, 100%. Like there's many users that have a VPN server. And then, I mean, once you have the VPN server working, it's from the mobile app side, it's fairly simple. You just specify all you got to do is specify the LAN address, I think, right, Ken? Let me go to it. Mobile devices.
Yeah, the software itself is kind of agnostic as far as how you're connecting. It's just that has to resolve back to your Blue Iris server. It's really as simple as that. We were planning on perhaps having some sort of an advanced networking session at one point that will cover topics like VPN, HTTPS, the finer points of the push notification with the reverse retrieval of the messages, all of that kind of thing, geofencing and more. So yes, it's certainly supported, but it just has to resolve back to your server address.
So if assuming that the VPN server is working, like all he's got to do is put in the LAN address, right?
Yeah, and you can test it just through a browser. I mean, it doesn't have to be through the app. I mean, if you have it resolving back to your server, you go to the browser, you type that address, you'll see your Blue Iris login screen show up. If you don't see that, then it's not going to work in the app either.
Oh, okay. Like, yeah, here's another test. Like, yeah. Like,
Yeah, no, I see it now. Yes.
Yeah. So it should work in theory, assuming your VPN server is working. And we do have customers that do use VPN, so we know it works, or it's been working. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Jay Berg, allowed to talk. Cal F, allowed to talk. Whoever chimes in first, guys. Tim McFadden, allowed to talk. Alan.
Hey, I had a question. So, and I asked it in the chat, but I get a lot of false alerts at night usually, where Blue Iris is detecting motion that's unrelated to the actual. So, like, I'll have two cars parked at my neighbor's house, and then there'll be a light in the distance, and all of a sudden I'll get a triggered one. Is the deep stack doing the dynamic masking like what was going on with the other tool that that was released before?
Yeah, it should be. You're talking about the static object testing, right? Like, unless you turned it off, it should be. Triggers, detect, ignore static objects, right?
Yeah, let me see if that's going on with my. And where's it at? And let's see here. Where did you go to again? Trigger, artificial intelligence. Yeah, that's still there.
Because otherwise, these cars would trigger, like, all these parked cars would, be triggering all the time. Like for me,
it doesn't.
One thing that just came up today in another support email was the customer did not have selected the motion sensors object detection. It was turned off. And without that, it can't do the test for the overlaying, the overlapping. That normally, yeah, go to there. And
This was off?
well, that needs to be on as well to do this properly. But then going into configure, the object detection was disabled. And what that does, that turned off the rectangles that Blue Iris uses to find motion. And in order for it to try to find an overlap between those rectangles and between what the objects that DeepStack is finding, that needs to be enabled. So he had that turned off. So
Yeah,
it kind of
mine's
created
disabled.
that whole detection.
Mine's disabled. So maybe, because I mean, I
So that's
feel
it.
like,
So what happened was it sent the entire image to DeepStack and it found that car, even though that's not where the motion was. You said it was a flashing light. So turn that back on, and now it will only trigger if the objects are overlapping what DeepStack finds.
okay. I got another question. I didn't understand completely what was going on with the trigger. You're talking about, what was it? The record. Sorry, I forget which one it was. Trigger or record when triggered versus record when or trigger when alerted.
Oh, back to the
What you're talking
presentation.
about. Yeah, it doesn't really make sense to me. Is that why would you do one versus the other? Does it one cut off some of the actual video?
When triggered versus when alerted?
Yes, one to actually, yeah, one trigger versus when alerted.
I normally have when triggered. Like the only use case that I found for when alerted, because I'm more like better safe than sorry. Like if they like I know I'm coming from AI, so I know AI is not perfect, and so I don't mind getting the triggered for motions. But like there's guys in Florida that where like they can't set the motion so that the bugs and the spiders, like stuff like that, like it keeps triggering. And so you get a lot of noise. Like some of these environments, I guess the human environments, you get a lot of noise.
Mhm.
And so if you don't do when alerted, then you're recording all those false, you're getting a lot of false triggers that you're recording, which may be fine. Like, like maybe storage isn't a big deal. And so you don't mind if your clip list, blows up with false triggers, because at the end of the day, their AI is still going to send the alert. So
Okay, so it's not reducing the amount of AI actual alerts. You're just collecting more events that are happening, and then so instead of collecting all the events and then having AI evaluate them, and then you're only saving the one that's actually alerted. In the case of when triggered, you're saving all those events, and then the AI ones you get alerted on, but you also have the existing events. Is that what we're saying?
exactly, like
Okay.
all this stuff on the database, like all the stuff that you're writing in, like maybe all those
Okay.
bugs you don't really want to, you don't even want to see it in the list,
Okay, that makes more sense now. Now I understand. I thought it was different amount of actual. I thought you were getting triggered. I thought you're actually getting alerted differently, essentially, but it's not the case. You're still being alerted on the AI events. You're just only saving the actual alerted events and not the triggered ones as well.
Exactly, correct.
Okay,
Well
all
said.
right, that makes sense. Okay.
Can maybe this was mentioned and I just missed it, and I did come late into the session, but what's the difference between a trigger and an alert?
Oh, that's a very important concept. So good question. So the triggers is like, this is based off of your motion sensors, or like whatever you have triggering the camera. Like it could be like that one gentleman had that use case where, like, say you have an AI camera, like, and that camera can tell Blue Iris to start recording. So however you decide to trigger is like you're telling Blue Iris to start recording. Okay. Now, a lot of those triggers may not result in an alert, like to your phone or SMS or whatever. And the reason is because the most common reason is we have DeepStack. So like,
Hi there.
one common example.
Oh, I'm trying to
who-
The problem is online shopping. It's
Let me mute that guy. Okay. So the most common example is here's a cancel alert. Like the motion triggered, but the road is blocked off in my zones. So there's nothing in the camera. There's nothing of interest, right? So I still record it, but I don't want to be alerted on it. So this is a difference between the camera's triggered, it started recording, but I didn't send an alert to me because I don't be bothered on this. Like this is noise, right? As far as I'm concerned. And so that's the difference between triggered and alerts. Does that make sense?
So basically an alert is something that it goes to a higher threshold.
Yeah, the way to think about it is you can even go back a step into, I used to call it sensing, was meaning there is something happening in the image. Then motion was, is there enough of something happening that we could say something's moving, and then maybe put it into boxes, and then go from motion to triggering, meaning this type of motion moved in a certain way where it's of interest. It moved from A to B, it did, it did something where I need to take some action on it, that's triggered. And then the final concept is alerting. That means that the trigger was verified as and confirmed by AI, and then the alert actions fire, which could be your emails and so on. So really the alerting refers to the actions that are sent. It's, you get an email at the end of it.
So where do I set the various levels of what becomes a trigger and what becomes an alert?
Well, by default, when it's triggered, it's an alert. What we're doing now with AI is confirming these alerts. We're saying the AI says it's not really an alert, so it becomes canceled. So it's a trigger that was not what that was then, the alert was canceled.
So an alert now is only generated when the AI confirms it as an alert.
That's one of many ways. So like that's the most common use case. Like now that we have deep stack and AI, a lot of you guys are canceling based off of AI. That's definitely one way to cancel like canceling a trigger from going into an alert. There's all this other stuff in the alerts tab. Like before AI, like a lot of these guys in Florida was saying like it's got to trigger, wait until triggered at least, like they would, I don't want to go into all this logic, but like basically, let me give you a simple one, like wait until triggered at least, like that setting. And then you say 3 times, all right, within a second. So like that setting is telling Blue Iris, like typically trigger, boom, send alert, trigger, boom, send alert. Now we had this level of intelligence where trigger, but if AI says there's something there, alert, all right? So that's kind of like most common where you might have a trigger, but you may not have an alert, right? Before AI, there's also this other stuff, like all this other logic that 99% of you guys probably never use, but there's these guys in Florida where like, well, if there's 3 triggers in a row within a second, so like if there's 3 of these, boom, 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 like within a second of each other, then send the alert.
Sam, just to clarify, that those settings are not really valid. You can't have 3 triggers within 1 second. So maybe you might want to use it like 3 triggers within 10 seconds,
Okay.
20 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute. It's just to verify that there's actually some action going on here. I mean, you will have missed the alerts from the first trigger, but maybe that's just noise. And then really somebody is really in my house trying to steal stuff if it's constantly triggering, something like that. So that was the purpose of that.
Exactly. So like basically there's other logic that you can add on that most people don't use, but there's other reasons why there'll be a trigger, but not an alert. And so AI is the most common example of that.
Great, thank you.
Can I just ask one more question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you just go through the motion sensor configuration, please? It's a bit confusing. You've got your minimum object size and minimum contrast and all that, please. Yep, that's the one. So how the big blue screen does what? And then the minimum object size, would you be able to explain that a bit?
Oh, 100%. So like the minimum object size, so like basically in relationship to this scene, the size of the object, based off of the algorithm that, you know, that Ken does behind the scenes, like to determine size of object, has to be that big. And then like the other safeguard is if it's too large. And this is mostly like, it's basically based off of this setting. So if you go to edit object size, if I turn that off, I think it'll go away. So like,
Oh,
so now I
okay.
turn it off. So like, but well, let me explain like what it's doing. So like
Yep.
the reason why you have the safeguard is because with outdoor cameras, you know, like the sun can come from the clouds into the sunlight, and all of a sudden the whole thing changes color, like all the pixels change. And so in order to safeguard against sending that alert, if a lot of stuff changes, like at least this much, like I think it's 67%. If 67, if 67 or greater percent of the image changes at once, that probably means there's some lighting issue, or not issue, but like some lighting change. And so don't bother triggering on that.
Okay. All right. So that's object size, and then minimum contrast.
Oh, that's the sensitivity of the camera. So like,
Ah,
if you crank this down, that means like if that pixel changes by like, you know, I don't know how much you know about pixels and stuff, but they're RGB values, and it's basically saying like if those numbers change very little, then consider that a change. Versus if you crank it way down, that color's got to change quite a bit before you say that it's something of significance.
yeah, because up top it says more sensitivity, less sensitivity, but there's no section. It's got minimum contrast, minimum duration, object size, but how does sensitivity relate to contrast and object size? I find that confusing. Does that more or less sensitivity relate to both the minimum object size and minimum contrast?
Yeah. So
Okay.
so how do you make the cameras more sensitive? Like there's two ways. You can make it like the color changes has to be, you know, you have smaller color changes. So that's what this is about. So that's why going to the left is making more sensitive. Like you're saying the change in color, okay? And then on top of that, if you say that the object size can be really small, then now you're making the camera super sensitive, right? Because very
Gotcha.
little. You got it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I got it.
Okay.
Super sensitive. Yep. Absolutely. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, it's a good question because I'm sure a lot of, you know,
Yeah.
people ask, but a lot of people have this question.
Hey, Sam, I have a question related to that, or maybe a suggestion. You know, I watched the hookup video where the guy kind of went through using the new stuff, right? And he changed a lot of settings, like, and I see your settings are changed to like simple instead of vector for motion detection and stuff like that. Can you guys maybe create a video or like a blog or something like that, or you know, in the forums to say these are, you know, because I'm assuming, you know, Ken's designing the product for maybe people not using DeepStack, right? And if you're not using DeepStack, then your settings would be this way. But if I go in and I use the defaults, and they may be designed for somebody that's not using DeepStack, but I am going to use DeepStack, and there's some settings that I could change that would make DeepStack work better, like maybe higher quality images, or the algorithm, you know, so it would capture more stuff and detect stuff, you know, but it would be filtered out by DeepStack. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. Like you're right, because I have DeepStack, I used to have Edge Vector, but because of AI, like I made everything really simple. So like you're right. So like we should have settings and defaults associated with DeepStack and without DeepStack, right?
Yeah, like a second default template to say, hey, I'm using AI. these are some best settings. I can change the object sizes smaller, and I can make these changes
Yeah.
that would work better in those scenarios. That way I capture more stuff. Because I did know, I changed my settings to his recommended settings, and it captured a lot more stuff, and it worked actually a lot better. But then I also had a lot more false alerts too. So then it's like, okay, maybe you guys might know a better middle ground. You work with a lot of different people, and I probably use the product way more than I do. So
That's good feedback. I think that's a good idea. So
Yeah, it's a good idea, Sam. If you can make some videos or something of, sort of the basic setups and what have you, that'll certainly help the community, I'm sure.
yeah,
or even just a second default setting, like, hey, this is a recommendation, like on that very first wizard page.
right. Yeah, that's good feedback, guys. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
And another thing, like for me, like when I set it to 190 and 40, I just did like look and feel, really. Like there's no like science. Like all I do is I turn on the trigger, configure. I want to see the highlights, right? I want to see what Blue Iris is doing. So it makes it super easy for me. So once I see what it's doing, like I remember like a dude was walking here and it wasn't triggering. So that's why like the original settings was like 400, like 500 or something. I can't remember the default, but the reason I kept cranking it down. And the only reason I did that is because I saw the rectangles and I saw that the guy wasn't being triggered. And so there's no science to it. I just like look and feel. I want to capture people that are walking, especially at nighttime here. Like I just look at the camera and I just like start tweaking with the settings, and then I see if it starts catching it. That's pretty much all I do. Like with those settings. Okay. Anyways. All right.
Sometimes when you set up the camera, there's nobody walking, so you're really flying blind.
That's true. But like if you're at your home, you can walk in front of your cameras and play it back.
Yeah.
So,
I've got to go back to the office, have a look, or send a friend out and say, hey, walk in front of the camera.
right. But
okay.
that's kind of like all I really do. Like
yeah, fair enough.
Like here's that car, right? Like, I just make sure that things I want to catch, I catch, right? By setting this, yeah.
Yeah, maybe go through all the setups like the other gentleman said before, go through the video, audio, trigger, record, and all that separate videos. I think the guy who used to do it online, he did it on version 4, but not on version 5 yet. So, yeah, just an idea.
Yeah, we will. We do this like every 2 weeks, so
yeah, cool.
We'll get to it for sure.
Okay, good on you. All right, I've got to go. It's a bit bloody late over here. Catch you later.
Yeah, have a good weekend. Thank you.
Okay,
Peter.
Thanks you guys. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Sam. And get back to me on my email. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, good night.
Good night. Cal F. Oh,
yeah, am I live now?
Yeah, you're live.
All right, thank you. Well, I'm going back to the person that was out mowing the lawn and kept triggering and stuff like that. What I usually do is turn the motion off, but then I'll forget to turn it back on, maybe on a couple cameras. Is there a feature in there, or could you put a feature in there to temporarily turn the record off and then have it automatically reactivated and whatever you set it for, 30 minutes or an hour or whatever? Is there a way of doing that now, or is that something the feature could be added?
Well, it's part of the product. So like Ken said, like I think the recommendation right now is just go and create a schedule and then create a where's profile? Profile, sorry. So like I have all these for like different webinars in the past.
The only thing there, it's intermittent. I might do it one day and not the next day or something like that, or might have people over and don't want to record all that stuff. And so I turn it off, but then I forget to turn it back on for evening or something. There's no temporary way.
The concept of the inactive profile, it's very similar, but then the inactive profile has a timeout. So you set it, right now it's defaulting to 8 hours. So after 8 hours, it will automatically go back to normal operation. But you could put that to 60 minutes or something, or however long,
Is that on a per camera basis? And how do you make it inactive?
No, this would be the entire system. It would be basically
Like
putting,
this. Yeah.
you
Oh.
can override this per camera though. I mean, if you want some cameras not to go inactive, they can have their own schedule.
Yeah, well, what I do is maybe just a couple cameras involved in the situation, so I just disable it. Then I forget to re-enable it. And like alarm, sometimes you set an alarm, you can disable it and it automatically come on, so you do forget it.
Yeah, well, there are several ways actually. Those are a couple of them. You can also, there's a concept called pause, camera pause. If you right click on any camera, there's a pause menu and you can select to pause it for, it's up at the top, fourth, fifth from the bottom, fifth from the top. And then you could just say pause it for 2 hours or something.
That pauses the motion detection.
Yep, it won't, it's basically like you did the shield icon, but only on that one camera.
Okay, well that should work.
And we'll show you a nice little countdown too in the header, showing you how long it's
Okay, yeah, that's on an individual basis. I use that to zero out the camera when it records when it shouldn't have, but okay, I'll try that. Yeah, I guess that would answer that problem, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's kind of a good idea. Even for the guy who's cutting the lawn in the backyard, like that's a good way to do it. Just turn off the backyard camera.
Does the video still show, or does it just turn the camera clear off completely? I mean, does it just turn off the motion detection, or does it turn the camera off completely? I guess
No,
I
the
could
live
try.
video continues.
Everything continues? Okay.
The live video continues. Yeah, if you want the live video to stop as well, then you have to move to the concept of inactive, which
Okay. No, I don't want the video to stop. I just wanted the motion detector to stop, and like it's the guy was having alerts, it would stop his alerts then also, right?
Yeah, this is, pause will just stop the alerts
Okay, great.
and the motion. Is
Yeah.
it still capturing motion, Ken? No, right?
it's exactly what the shield icon does, but for one camera. And that is configurable, but by default, it stops alerts and recording. And
Right.
triggers.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of options there from 30 seconds to indefinitely or 24 hours if you want to. That's great.
Yeah, that's good. And you can do it from your mobile phone too, so that's kind of cool too.
Okay, one other question. I'm not using Deep Stack, and I record the simple and edge factor, but as I talked to Ken earlier about getting, when clouds come over, it keeps triggering my recording, and I get gigabytes of file sizes and nothing useful in it. The best way to cure that is going to that Deep Stack or something. I'm not familiar with it, but would Edge Vector help that? I tried it. I didn't see any difference really between simple and Edge Vector as far as triggers.
No, you're talking about the sunlight, like all of a sudden.
Yeah, cloud goes under and the sun, or sun goes over cloud or whatever, and you get a lot of shadows. And then the other thing is, if it's shady and the wind's blowing, the trees are shades or the shadows are moving, it triggers on those things also, of course.
Yeah. I mean, those are very common problems. So like, I mean, with AI, it's simple. Like, it'll just detect like nothing's there and not send the alert.
Yeah, you have to have AI in the cameras to use that. Is that correct?
Deep Stack, that's integrated with Blue Iris now. Like, you can use it for all your cameras. So like,
Okay, I'm not familiar. I'll have to investigate that, research that.
There's a just go to the forum. Blue Iris tips and tricks. Look at the Deep Stack plus Blue Iris. That's where to start. On how to install it and configure it. So that's one way to do it. If you don't have the AI, and like AI is the easiest way, then you only have the motion stuff. Then you have to kind of tweak it. So like the object size exceeds, like this is the setting that the sunlight to the cloud type scenario.
Yeah, I've tried that. That doesn't seem to help anything.
No, okay. And for the shadows, it is what it is. Like the shadows, like the minimum object size is what you got to play with to like not
Yes,
trigger it.
I've got those set pretty sensitive because I like record small objects in really dark areas, so that's pretty sensitive.
Yeah, so like
That's it.
so the only way around that is like during the day, like you have a day profile and night profile, and for the day you make it less sensitive, and at night,
Mhm.
like yeah, it gets kind of hairy, but that's why I like AI a lot for like those types of things. Like when I get the like here, where's that night?
But again, the AI has to be built into the camera, is that correct?
No, deep stack is our
That's basically the same thing. Okay.
yeah.
That might help considerably then.
So like here's shadows, like I don't know what other there was a cat there.
Yeah.
Where's that scenario? Like I know what you're talking, like here, like something here, some of these shadows here, like trigger the camera, but I didn't get alerted because of AI. So like that's like for outdoor cameras, AI makes life a lot easier in terms of like avoiding all this like all that nonsense, right? All the shadows, all the leaves, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like those shadows you have, if it was windy, they'd be moving and I'd be triggered.
Exactly. And with AI, you see it's all being canceled out by AI. So,
Okay.
so
All right, I'll check into that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Wow, it's 9:36. All right, last question, guys. Jesse, allowed to talk.
Hey guys, thank you very much. First of all, Sam and Ken, I'd like to appreciate you guys for making this thing the gold standard. My question is, initially I installed DeepStack on my PC as directed, and now that it's really getting integrated into Blue Iris, do I still need that download for DeepStack to be running or on my PC, or can I just delete that from now on? Just get rid of it altogether.
I'm not quite.
Yeah,
Follow-
DeepStack is not part of the Blue Iris installation, so you still need DeepStack installed separately.
Okay.
Then there's a place on the settings AI page where you specify where that is, and Blue Iris can automatically then start and stop it for you when Blue Iris starts and stops.
Okay, so it is still operating in the background. Great.
Yes.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Okay, I was just wondering because it's getting a lot better. This thing is really taking off. It's helped me out a lot with all the false triggers like you were just talking about with the trees blowing around. I'm in Virginia. It's very windy sometime, and the sun and the clouds and all these things take into effect. And once I installed that, it greatly reduced a lot of my false triggers. And I'm still tweaking the system as we all are, trying to figure it out. I'm getting a lot of canceled alerts, and maybe you can address this, that I do see some areas in canceled alerts where it could have triggered, but it didn't. Can you talk about that a little bit, maybe?
You have that clip had something in there that should have
Yes.
alerted, but DeepStack said there wasn't anything there.
Yeah, it's very rare, but I do notice some of it coming up, and I do see some in there that are canceled as an alert, but it doesn't show as a trigger for a person walking by, let's just say.
Yeah. Like now you're getting into like the limitations of AI, so that's definitely possible. Like look some of these canceled. Like, well, maybe like I'm not exactly sure, but like this thing really clearly has some activity, but this might have been canceled because of a previous capture. But you'll find it. Like you'll see cancels that, especially at nighttime. Like it's not the AI is not perfect. Like headlights of a car, like it doesn't have enough perspective to, like for us, it's obvious that's a car, right?
Yes.
But for the AI, it's not so obvious. So there are limitations to AI.
Awesome. Thank you again, guys.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right, guys. Happy Friday. Thank you, and have a great weekend. I know it's Memorial Day in America, so have a great weekend, and we'll reconnect in 2 weeks. Ken, any closing thoughts?
I'd just like to echo that as well. We'll see you guys in a couple of weeks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.